Welcome to the Nonprofits and Media Podcast, where we talk to leaders involved with media inside a variety of nonprofit organizations about the different ways they approach marketing and communications. I'm Nathan Pfaff, and my job is to tease out what benefits or results they've seen in their content strategy so that you can apply those to your own life or organization. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Nonprofits and Media. Lauren Odderstol is the Global Content Manager for Medical Teams International. Medical Teams is a nonprofit that has field offices in 7 countries and provides life-saving medical care to those in emergencies or crises. Lauren has been at Medical Teams almost 6 years, but has been in the media and marketing space a long time, including having experience managing digital assets with businesses such as PBS and other nonprofits such as IJM. Lauren loves traveling and also does her own photography work on the side. In this episode, we get into the details of how content gets made in the nonprofit structure, the differences of doing media for individuals versus corporate or institutional sponsors, and we talk through a specific campaign Lauren and Medical Teams conducted. At the end, Lauren also shares her opinion about how fostering a healthy work culture can allow nonprofits media to thrive. You definitely don't want to miss this one. Take a listen. Lauren, thanks so much for joining the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Nathan. It's good to see you.
Yeah, you too. So to start off, tell me what it means to join the team or be part of the team.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Medical Teams has been around since 1979, and it originally started as this volunteer-led medical group of doctors, basically from Salem, Oregon, who just kind of were a ragtag bunch that flew to Cambodia to help provide medical care for people who were survivors of genocide, essentially. So that's really where it started, and that's kind of where that team mentality originally came from, was this, we're sending out volunteer teams to different parts of the world to give people emergency medical care. Since then, that's changed quite a bit with decolonization efforts and really focusing on localization around the world. We truly have a pretty global network of really local medical professionals in every country where we work who are still providing that quality, urgent medical care to people who are mostly coming from contexts of displacement. So displaced by war, famine or hunger, or climate change or things like that, even economic crisis like what you see in Venezuela. So that is how we've evolved as an organization, and being on a team means that you are a part of making that work happen. So if you're a staff member, you're on the team. Like if you're a doctor on the ground, you're on the team. Even if you're a mother in the community who is advocating for health for other women, you're a part of that team. So that's really where that join the team or being a part of the team mentality comes from. And it was our old tagline that is currently kind of hotly contested with our staff members, but I personally still like it. So.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting. Yeah, because as I was, watching a lot of the media in preparation for this, I noticed that tagline in a lot of your videos and things like that. So yeah, it's interesting that it's a contested thing, because I thought if it's fits perfectly with the name, right? Medical Teams. So including like partners and supporters along in that. So
it is interesting. I like the I agree. Yeah, I really like it, but I think it's because of actually I don't really know why. I can't speak for people who are kind of hotly contesting it. I like it because I feel like it is a pretty inclusive thing that works well, whether you're a donor or a doctor. So
yeah, I guess now I've seen a lot of the end cards that say the act, heal, love, whatever that is. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So then what is your role in the organization? What do you do?
Yeah, so I am essentially the humanitarian, photographer, storyteller, video producer. The title that I have is Global Content Manager. And my role is I have built and I oversee this global team of communications officers who are sourcing all of the content that we use to fuel any marketing, fundraising, or brand initiatives that are coming out from medical teams. So everything that you see on the website, on social media, in a print mailer to a donor, anything like that, that's all starting with my team.
Oh, awesome. Gotcha. So how closely do you work with VP of marketing or whatever? Are you up there?
I am at the managerial level, and so we have then a director above us, and then the VP of MAD above that, and so MAD is what we call it, marketing and development. So,
Okay.
marketing and development spans everything from corporate and foundations to development operations to all the different donor levels of like mid, mass, and major donors, not including institutional donors. And then our kind of brand creative and communications team. So I work fairly closely with the VP, but like it's kind of, they've got a much broader reach. So
Gotcha.
it kind of depends on what's going on at any given point in time.
Gotcha. And then how many locations, I guess, office locations do you guys have globally? And do you kind of manage or work with all of them?
Yeah, we work in, I want to say it's 7 countries right now. I'm going to list them off so I can count them. It's Colombia, Ethiopia, Sudan, Tanzania, Uganda, Ukraine, and the United States. So yeah, 7. And I work with, yes, all of the countries. So we have, we didn't used to have this when I first started working. So when I came in to the marketing team, we only had one communications officer in Uganda who was pretty new. And so I was told when I came in at like the start of 2020 onto the team, like pretty early, right before COVID hit the United States, that it was my job to get stories. And our focus is really on like patient stories and using those to leverage fundraising with private donors, because that was the whole vision, was like, oh, they just want to see that story of that one person who's been helped. That's how they're going to be emotionally compelled to give. And then COVID hit, and I was actually in Uganda on a video trip when the United States was shutting down from COVID. And so it was an interesting kind of dramatic thing happening at that time. But when it hit, I was like, oh, I still need to get stories, I still need to get content. So I started to build this global team and say, hey, we need to actually establish an in-country communications presence in every country where we work. And today we have that, which is just amazing. We've got a comms officer in every country, and that's the team that I lead, is really training, equipping them, working with them on different kinds of requests, and making sure that we're really spanning that multi-channel content strategy and simplifying the requests across the different channels to really leverage powerful content that's going to drive the brand and our fundraising forward.
Awesome. So basically you're equipping people in those, I don't know what you call them, branches, offices, to kind of like capture
country offices
to capture their own content, so that, you know, you don't have to send a team from the States as often or things like that.
Yeah. In so many words. Yeah.
Yeah. How has that been going? Had that been like super successful, or what's your opinion of that strategy?
Yeah, I think it's been great. It's been, that was really part of my dream and my vision from the beginning too, because when I started, there was this mentality around mostly sending in, I mean, to be quite frank, white people to go and like, so like I mean, like I know I'm a quarter Korean, but like I look super white. So it's like, to go and get like all the stories and the images and things like that. And I think I just was like, we had some connections with great contractors who were already in the areas that we were working in. At the time, we were working in like Lebanon and Bangladesh and Guatemala as well. And yeah, and honestly, I think it was sort of a forcing function of COVID. Like we couldn't get there, so we had to rely on local people. And then also, realistically, those trips are great. Like doing 2 to 4 trips a year can work really well. You can send in really highly trained professionals and get great content. So that's still a huge part of what we need to do as an organization. But to get that ongoing content, like social media kind of stuff right now is kind of more cell phone filmed. You don't really need to be a professional photographer to get that stuff done. The getting stories all the time, those stories really support the funnels that we need for video and for social and fundraising. And so that's something that we need on a consistent basis that we can't always rely on trips for. And then I think video is kind of a tricky one. Video, I don't usually ask comms officers to do because that's pretty elevated. Yeah. Some of them have that skill set and that passion. So like if they do, I want to cultivate that in them and allow them to express that. But photography, I do actually train them on because I think it's really valuable to have some kind of powerful and beautiful visual to support the work that we're doing. So yeah, I think it's going really, really well. They often come in feeling like they are like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do these things. It's a lot of pressure. And it's such a great thing to, like, as a manager, to be in the position of, hey, it's okay. like everyone's coming in at that level. That's totally fine. And you'll get there. You'll see the growth. You'll see the change. Just keep showing up, keep working at it. And like, I'll support you. I'll encourage you. I'll help you to grow in this. And then it is, I mean, honestly, it's the best part of my job. It is the best part of my job to watch them just transform and improve over the years. And they really do. So they're incredible. It's a great team to work with.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I like that you said that, even video doesn't have to be intimidating now because, trends are going to be more organic and stuff shot on your cell phone. So like even that, is pretty easy for anybody to kind of pick up and do without a lot of training. So that kind of is almost super beneficial for people like your teammates on the ground to just be able to like capture someone sharing their little 2-minute testimony or whatever of the impact of the organization or whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. I think it still takes a little bit of training sometimes because I think when you're spanning different cultures, and we're targeting a primarily American audience, we have to kind of train people almost at the cultural level too. So there's a little bit of scripting that goes into that because the way that people talk in different countries is just different. Like we express ourselves differently, which is a great and wonderful thing about being an international organization. But that's an interesting thing to kind of toe the line on as we're targeting American audiences. We need to kind of work with global staff to help them understand what an American audience wants. And ideally, one day we'll actually expand to really have a broader audience than just like the United States. But for now, that's really what we're working with.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's true. Like a lot of times they don't even know what to include or like why their story is special or significant. Because for them, it's just like, it could just be their life. But for a Western audience coming in being like, no, this is actually like really unique or really powerful or whatever, but they don't know how to communicate that or why it's special. But
do you have a hard time with that with like video and trying to get people to understand that when you're doing video stories? Or do you feel
definitely. Like I can fully relate. Yeah, you don't want to coach them. You'll be like, could you just say like this part? But you want to try to have them share it organically because then it's so much more powerful. But you also know the sound bites that you'd prefer to get that would make it easy for you in the editing room or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Always
so
a challenge.
Do you guys have a like how are potential partners finding your organization? Do you guys have a typical way that you reach them or sales funnels, so to say, that you kind of lean into when thinking about getting content?
Yeah, we have a multi-tiered like partner and funder structure essentially. So our funders really span everything from institutional, corporate, and foundation donors to what we call M3, which is major, mid, and mass donors. So there are different giving levels that those donors have. And
say that again: major, mid, and mass.
Major, mid-level, and mass. Yeah, exactly.
I like it because they all sound very big and very important. Like even I didn't know whether major was bigger or mass was bigger. I
didn't even think about that. Yeah, if you actually hear the context of it, it sounds like, oh yeah, mass sounds huge, so that must be it.
Yeah.
No. So they find us. It kind of varies depending on each partner level. So with the institutional, foundation, corporate, and even major donor levels, so major would be like a major private donor, so someone who's giving like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars or something like that.
Good.
They are, I think, mostly relationship based actually. So a lot of that is just like doing prospect analysis, kind of seeing who's out there, who's interested in supporting an organization like medical teams, who's aligned with us as an organization. And then sometimes it's kind of cold calling and just reaching out and starting to build that relationship. I think those institutional donors actually do have a relational side to it too. Those would be like government institutions that are giving, money to us. And so it operates, to me, it reminds me a lot of when I was in government contracting, because it's a similar kind of idea of like you get awarded money and then you have to report back on how that money is used and what the impact is of that. So it's grants. But you still have this kind of relationship building with whoever's really at the top there. And I think that happens at the corporate and major level as well. So sometimes major donors and corporate donors might find us through Events, again, a lot of times it's cold calling. With major donors, it might be through friends. And so with corporate, it could be through their employees. So with the majors, lot of relationship development, and they really like, similar to corporate donors and foundation donors, actually, they really actually like the hard numbers. They want to know how big the impact is that they're having, as much as they sometimes like this kind of warmer, fluffier stories and things like that. You really have to balance it out with the head and the heart. And with corporate donors, we actually have a corporate team that does email marketing strategy with like corporate employees, because there's corporate match giving and things like that. And then you have like people who are managing relationships with the actual kind of corporate social engagement people at the different places that support us. And then honestly, we'll do kind of like, oh, what's that?
All right. Are the corporate donors part of the mid tier, or are they part of the other one?
They're completely separate. Yeah, they're like their own team. Yeah. Gotcha. So literally we have institutional donors actually fall under our program areas. So that's where that money and those funds get managed. And then we have the majors team that's focused on really cultivating relationship with major donors, the corporate team, the foundation team. And then we have the marketing team, which is where the mid and the mass come in. So our marketing strategy is to target leads and current donors. And so current donors, anyone who's given like a one-time gift in a certain kind of past time frame. Lapsed would be kind of the third category there. So someone who gave a while ago but hasn't given in a little bit, but they have some kind of connection point with our organization. And that's really where we're leveraging that multi-channel strategy with social media, email, website, print, all the above. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that touches on one of my other questions that I was going to bring up later, but since you mentioned it, of like how corporations and institutions really like knowing the numbers to be able to share kind of like their impact and their giving. So like, is that the primary way you guys maybe keep donors once you have them, or like what are other strategies in order to kind of like, after you get one, keep them around, or like keep that relationship going?
For corporate and institutional, is that the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's different. I think kind of similar to like getting a job. Once you have a foot in the door, it's like easier to stay in the door than it is, if as long as you kind of keep the pulse check going with whoever it is that you have a relationship with. Totally. So corporate donors, they sometimes like events and things like that, but we found that like it's kind of hit or miss. Like sometimes they'll get like a table as a corporate sponsor. Really, I think they just want to get that kind of good word out there about the good that they're doing, they're accomplishing. So sometimes you can really see the benefit of leveraging PR efforts with them. So for example, in our US programs, our corporate sponsors fund and have their names on the side of our big red vans that are these dental clinics that go all around the Pacific Northwest in the United States. And and then they'll love to get like some PR, some kind of good publicity around like the good that they're accomplishing by sponsoring a clinic that's providing urgent dental care to people living in like rural, indigenous, urban communities, things like that. So that's one way, is that kind of, ego stroke for the corporations. Another is sort of engaging them in intellectual events is another thing that we've done. So we've done kind of like evening events, even in downtown Portland, where we're doing it in partnership with a corporation, and it's like an educational event that people can come and attend to learn about, displaced people in the crises that we're working in around the world. So it's almost like a live podcast style kind of thing, but it's just it's more kind of heady, which I think is really where the corporate donors likes to live, is really in that kind of more like facts, figures, heady space than the fluffy space. So
yeah, it's interesting that you have to have kind of all the different channels, because different audiences will respond differently. Like an event could be super powerful for one sponsor, but like another one doesn't really care, if they're not as heady or something. But I bet your role is probably more for the mass market in terms of like getting leads, right? You'd probably be less on the corporate I
touch all of it.
You touch all of it. Okay.
Yeah. Because like my team is basically like the source for all content. So I will cut videos for the corporate team. I actually used to be on the corporate team. And so
Oh, nice.
I'm more familiar with their needs and what they're doing. Oh, another thing they do is actually volunteer events. So they'll host like these volunteer hygiene kit building events. And that's something that a corporation can like buy essentially or sponsor to engage their employees and like giving back to the community. So those
Yeah.
are kind of fun. But yeah, no, with wait, remind me your question. I'm so sorry. With the corporations.
Oh, you were just talking about how, well, I asked whether your role was
Tied to that.
more on the, mass marketing, getting leads, or if you also worked with the like corporate and industry departments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do work more with the mass marketing and the major side, but I also, everything that my team does supports the whole funnel. So with the corporation, or corporate side, I also work kind of on the team of people that are managing like the program information that we have from our program team, and really need to have a deep understanding of like what it is that we actually do, what that looks like in each country, our impact, our numbers. So on top of all the stories and the photos and the videos and things like that, we're also managing like information flow and kind of serving as a subject matter expert of sorts who can translate program material into more layman's terms.
Yeah, which is great and needed. How closely do you work with like email blasts and the team that does all the newsletters and those kinds of things?
Fairly closely. Yeah, we're all like, it's everything that I'm sourcing is going to support all those different channels. So
nice.
Yeah.
Have you guys found a good rhythm for those in terms of like sending out content? Is it better to just like do it as much as possible whenever you have a new story or touch point, or do you not want to like overwhelm people with too much content and kind of pace it out or something?
Yeah, that is another hotly contested area. I think everyone has different opinions on it. Generally speaking, that's a meeting that's coming up after you and I.
Oh, really? Perfect.
Yeah, finished recording. Is this sort of like, I'm like, can I sneak you into the meeting? Do you want to come see? It's like a communications planning meeting that really talks through, hey, here are all the communications that we have going out to any number of these different groups. So like what's like, here we're sending out an email newsletter and it's going to target lapsed donors, current donors, leads, mids, majors, and so then whoever is responsible for their audience, like on the majors team or the mid team or the mass team, can see, okay, if I'm a mass donor, I just hit my mic, sorry. I'm a mass donor, I'm going to see this email on this day, this email on this day, and this email on this day. And I don't think there's any rhyme or rhythm specifically to it other than sort of like a bit of a gut check where they're like, oh, we don't want to over inundate them. So there's a balance that they're striking where like at any given point, they would be like, that feels like a lot. Let's pull this email back, or let's shift this thing or this thing. And that's really interesting when we do like disaster response, because we've historically been like responding to disasters as they come up as an organization. And when that happens, you kind of have to drop all current communications plans and really like infiltrate with these disaster response communications. So that's always a conversation when things like that come up, which just happened last month, actually.
Yeah, and I bet when those crises happen, you have to drop everything because you also want the content to be current and relevant because people are seeing it in their news feed, and so you want to be able to be another information source in there and allow people to be able to help or give through you. So I'm sure that throws off your entire schedule or planning, but whether necessary.
It can, and you have really different schedules that are going on. Like with the mass marketing, they're really focused. We have kind of a divide there. One side is really focusing on fundraising appeals, and so we send out 8 fundraising appeals throughout the course of the year, and that is mirrored in email and like even newsletters and print. So there's sort of like a kind of rhythmic strategy that they're taking there around like introducing someone to a story in a newsletter, and then following up with another like email and print letter and things like that. So that strategy has been pretty ironed out for a long time. And then the emails that are just kind of more like when we would do a video launch or like what we call like the field report, which is sort of like an update, like an impact report of like, hey, here's what's happening on the ground around the world with medical teams. Those kind of more like informative emails, those are a bit more not necessarily ad hoc, but I don't think they're as rhythmic as the appeals
Sure.
emails. So those have more flexibility where if something comes up that's more relevant, we can push that through. Or if it's an appeal thing, then we might have to adjust some of our appeal schedule to push forward its faster appeal. So
Gotcha. And then do you provide, I don't know, photos or content for those email blasts, or do you help pick the stories, or how would that work?
yeah, yes, it's sort of a partnership. So it depends on the context. Like last month we had a Sudan was kind of popping in the news, and that's a place where we work because they're starting to use words like famine, and they've been facing a civil war for like it. We were already working there when civil war broke out, I think in April of last year. So it's been about a year and a half almost already. Um, and yeah, it kind of sometimes it comes from the top, honestly. Like the VP might just be like, hey, all hands on deck. Let's figure out what we need to do to like push forward the Sudan piece. In an ongoing nature, it then just is like honestly normal coworker relationships, like me checking in with the appeals team and being like, hey, what are we thinking for stories, for the coming really like 2 quarters out. They think further ahead than everyone else. So they're about 6
Oh,
to
wow.
9 months out in what they're looking for because with the printing, you have to get it a little bit more lead time.
Yeah.
And then with social media, it's kind of connecting on like, okay, what do we feel like? Let's generate some ideas around what we think is going to engage donors well. What are some upcoming relevant things going on even in pop culture, or what's going to align with some of the things that we're pushing out in other channels. So that one has a little bit more variety to it.
Yeah. Totally. Gotcha. So, going back a little bit more, you kind of said you were a little bit of the, I don't know, curator of information or gathering those kind of stories. When would you decide to do kind of more of like a long form or like a video, kind of invest a little bit more resources into really developing and capturing this story well, versus just kind of a email or social media post or something?
Yeah, it's a little chicken or the egg. So that's a great question. um, Generally speaking, when I came into this role, I was told, hey, you got to lead 2 video trips a year. Obviously, that didn't happen with COVID. But I led 1 video trip a couple months into this role. And so the mentality back then is that they used to say our brand was story of one. And this is kind of where you get a distinction between the organization and me. I pushed back on that a little bit, and I said, the story of one is like a mechanism. It's kind of like it's like a tool or a tactic that you're using through different channels to target donors, but that's not really like a brand necessarily. And so, because like the brand is like, we are a medical organization who is providing life-saving care to people who are in displacement contexts around the world. Like that's really like who we are as a brand. So I kind of disagreed with it at first. But I don't disagree with the idea of using a story of one. I think it's a really powerful tool to get people really familiar with their work and to really illuminate how that impact matters, and that just for one person, right? And then you can kind of imagine the scale of that if we're targeting and reaching millions of people a year.
So is your kind of discrepancy with it not necessarily the use of telling one story to communicate the effect, but not getting lost in the specifics to kind of make sure that people know that the brand and organization as a whole, does a larger amount of work? Or like what's your exact, like, flesh out the difference for me again?
Yeah, my thing with it is that I did not think it was broad enough to really capture all of the impact or capture or communicate all the impact that we are accomplishing as a brand that I think would actually matter to a donor. I think it was really focused on just the heart of the matter and not the head. And I think there's a lot of strength in putting the two together, really. Like you have to target egos, pathos, and logos, to really get all of those pieces connecting for a donor. That's really what's going to light them up. And the pathos is nice, right? It feels good. And you can really that can be incredibly compelling for people. And this is video work, right? That is like part of it. And no one really, like, I was thinking this the other day. Someone was asking me about doing a video and they were just like, yeah, but like, can we just not list off the audiences? And I was like, let me reassure you that it is never interesting in a video to just have someone listing off audiences.
Oh yeah.
I was like, I don't really want that in a, no one wants that in a video.
Yeah. Well, why would they do that? Why were they wanting to list off audience?
Oh, it was talking about like the communities that we target in our US programs. And they were like, yeah, but can we
Gotcha.
not get too specific about it? Because like, you know, sometimes it changes or we don't always know, we don't have control over funding. And I was like, it's never going to be interesting to sit there and listen to someone just list it.
List off the list. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that that's kind of my thing with the story of one is that I love it, and I think it's a really powerful tool, but I think it's only one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Right.
I noticed in a lot of your videos would have like single faces or like one single person.
Yep.
And I was wondering if that was intentional, like trying to hone in on like a sole individual.
Yeah.
Is that a little bit of a, I don't know, tension within the people of the company, or was that like, talk to us about that kind of, was that intentional or not?
No, that was the story of one. Yeah, that's intentional. I think
Okay.
it's you know, and that's the thing is like I can come into any role, and I worked for a number of nonprofits, and I have my own opinions about how to do things well. I'm sure you know this too, as being like a video contractor. Like you know what best practices are, right? And you're working with a client who sometimes doesn't always know what those best practices are or has their own opinion or their own thoughts on what that is. The reality in this context is like I'm an employee working for an organization. So I can express my opinion, and then they can still be like, my boss can still be like, no, you're wrong. This is what we're doing. This is your job. And then I'm like, great, I have a job to do. So I need to deliver according to this client would then be my organization that I work for, according to what they're saying. And that's okay. Like there's that kind of moment where you're like, that's fine. I'll do what you're asking me to do. And then we'll see how it does, you know? And
Yeah.
a lot of times that with a video too, the story one, I think works really well because a lot of the reasons. So to go back to your earlier question, we really didn't necessarily find a story and then go out and do a video because we liked the story so much. There were moments where I really wanted to do that, but it's been more, okay, we need to have a video. We need to have some kind of video support our event work or kind of like support our overall content and marketing funnel. And so then it's the reverse. We go out and we find that story. And based off like the stories that we already have, or sometimes we need to go find a new story. So that's really how we go about it, is like just knowing that, hey, we need to have some kind of core piece of content. And back then it was because we set up a brand with story of one. So they were like, oh, this core piece of content is going to drive forward everything that we do in all of our channels. It's all we talk about. We don't do the heady stuff as much. It's just story of one. So that was really where that was coming from.
Gotcha. Is Florence's story one of those story of ones?
Yeah, indeed it is.
So let's use that as kind of a case study, because that's the current main story that's on the website right now. And I know that you did that trip and took a lot of photos for it. So tell us a little bit about that, how that came about, and your trip going to Uganda.
Yeah, I love Florence. She's so great.
You had a very powerful story. I mean, I was really impressed and moved.
I'm glad you liked it. That always makes me really happy to hear that. And I mean, I know you know this too. Like, it's just so sweet to know the people behind the story and to like have those memories and be there with them and know how amazing they are. And you're just like, I just want everyone to know how great they are. Like, I just hope that comes through and that they can see it and they can see what I see in this person.
Totally.
Yeah, it was another video trip that we needed to have because at the time we were still really driving forward with this story of one brand. So it was just, you know, and again, I don't actually have a problem with the story of one. I'm good with it. I just kind of like having all the other pieces with it.
Sure.
So with that story, it was really interesting because when we were doing video planning, a lot of it depends on security context. We're working in like war context, you know, and so sometimes you literally can't send in a team with cameras. Like in Ethiopia, they would confiscate your cameras at the airport and put it in this giant room with a bunch of cameras that are just lost forever.
Where all the cameras I've seen them. They're very sad.
Where all the cameras go. That's so sad. You see all the long lenses and everything. It's tragic. But so we were kind of limited in where we can travel to because you have these different security contexts that we're working in. And Uganda tends to be one of the safer contexts that we work in. So it's really easy to go there. They have a number of refugee settlements where we are working, and where we have clearance and access to go in and do an actual video project, a video trip for a week long. That's what we do. We do week long trips, because that's what our budget allows for. So
Right. Yep.
what we also found too is that like if you go beyond a week, it can be pretty exhausting, and it can be exhausting for the people you're interviewing too. So it is kind of a sweet spot.
Sure.
But yeah, so with Florence, one of my favorite things about that is that we were pulling stories with the Ugandan comms officer at the time, and they were pulling a lot of stories from this one settlement that's close to Kampala, where you kind of fly into or go to the capital of Uganda. And there were like probably 7 stories from one settlement called Chaka. There are probably like 4 stories from another massive settlement that serves almost 300,000 people called Changwali. And then there was only one story from the settlement called Ramamwanja. And that story was Florence's story.
But did you know where all these stories were before going in, or did you find them once you got there that week?
We did, because sometimes we plan around like the logistics of a location too. Like we have to take that into consideration and think through like, okay, how far do we have to travel each day? So if we go to Changwali, you have a 4-hour round trip car ride every single day, because it's 2 hours from where you stay to get into Changwali. So logistics are definitely a part of that consideration, because that can really be exhausting for the team. But normally we don't like to go somewhere where we don't have a backup story option, because you might know this well already, that if you go in and like everything can be a lot,
yeah,
you want to come out with something, and you can go in and kind of like hope for the best, and like you have everything be aligned up, and the person says yes, and you can get there, and then suddenly they get freaked out or they say no, and like our responsibility is to honor that consent. But then then you're kind of screwed. You just have to go around and try and find a backup story if you don't already have one. So it was risky, but we were reading her story, and I was just like, I just feel like this is the one. I just like keep coming back to it. I really feel good about it. I think we need to go with this one. And I forgot I said that, but when we were on the trip, the Ugandan comms officer reminded me of it. He's like, "Hey, Lauren, don't you remember that we were talking about this and we were reading through all the stories, and we were concerned about not having a backup, but you just kept coming back to this one. You said, I think this is it. I think this is the one." And I said, "No, I completely forgot that, but thank you for
reminding me. I was right, and I agree with myself."
But I know I'm read again. I'm big surprise. But I was also like, oh, that's so compelling and so cool, because and I told this to my staff when I got back. I was like, I really believe that God wanted Florence's story to be told. I believe that He was really aligning everything for it to be her, and it was so beautiful to watch that unfold. So that's my favorite part about her story, and how we ended up with her. Yeah.
That's awesome. So did you get all those the 4 from the other village and the 3 from did you get all those stories on that one trip? No, you kind of just on Florence's.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we really try to focus on one story and then have a backup story if we can. And then we go in, and on day 1, so I think we were talking about consent a little bit before. When it comes to consent, we'll get the clearance before we get into the trip, because it'd be so crazy to show up with a whole team of cameras and be like, "Hey, ready to go," and not have asked for consent before we get there. So we make sure that they understand the context of what that means. Like what are the implications of bringing in this big team? What can they expect? Things like that. And then we'll meet with them on day 1 with like no cameras, and it's just a conversation. It's just us chatting, building that trust, getting to know them, and kind of seeing like, is this going to work? Like we need to get a sense too as producers of like, do we actually think there's a chance this story will work? And make that decision day 1 of like, do we cut it and find something else, or do we move forward with it? But as a balance too of like not wanting to get too much of the story or too much of the emotion, right? Because you want to save that for the camera. So it's kind of this delicate dance that we do. Then we go into filming on day 2 usually.
That's great. I love that, because that was one of my questions is how do you, and I'm sure medical teams goes into a lot of sensitive situations where you have people that are dealing with like medical problems, right? Whatever that is, in war zones or who knows what. So you don't want to like come in with your big film crew and camera and like scare them or like traumatize them even more, because they're already in a very vulnerable position. So I love that you kind of brief them and say like, hey, is this okay? Give them what to expect. Not going with cameras on day 1. Are there other things that you do maybe during filming or throughout the next couple of days in order to make sure that they remain comfortable and good with it, or like that you're not just kind of extracting or exploiting them or their story? Are there like other techniques or things that you guys do?
Yeah, that's a great question. The two things I would say. First, implied consent is informed consent, not implied consent. Informed consent, where they understand the implications of what they're consenting to, is really important. So whenever we're asking for consent, and this is with anything, this is with like photos, stories, anything like that, we want to make sure that before we engage in anything that the person who's on the other side of that understands the context in which it can be used. I was just at a clinic yesterday with my employee where we were going through interviewing people and talking about like the informed consent piece of it. And so, it was very in depth because we were working with people who were migrants in the United States, and there are a lot of sensitivities around that. They might have a lot of security concerns, and so some of them did not want to be on social media, or didn't want to be on a website, or don't want to show up on a print mailer. And so we get really specific about like, hey, we use these stories and these images. We can use them in a number of channels, but you get to choose what you want to say yes to. So if a couple of the people yesterday were like, hey, I'm okay with just saying yes to sending my photo and my story just to the people who funded these clinics, so those corporate donors like Providence and Alaska Airlines. And I'm okay with them seeing it. And then I don't want to see it on social media or website or other print mailers. And we're like, great, no problem. We'll note it on your consent form. We'll make sure. And so that's a big part of it, is like really being clear with people about what it means so they feel super comfortable and in control of their own narrative, right? Because like it's basically reducing any kind of power that we have in that situation and giving it all back to them, which they already have it, but just recognizing that they have the right to refuse to be photographed or to refuse to having their story or their likeness show up in different locations. That's a really vulnerable thing to give control over, like, of your story. Like,
Yeah.
I've had this happen before where like someone portrayed me in a way where I was like, that's not really how I portray myself.
Yeah.
And it was such a good reminder, I think, that I come back to, of like, this is a really, really, really special thing that we are being given the privilege to use and tell, and we have to do that in the most like honoring and dignifying way possible. And one part of that is really getting clear about consent things. On video trips, it's a gut check, so it's kind of, you have to observe body language, how comfortable someone is, if they're kind of closing up or closing off, or if you sense discomfort, you want to check in with them periodically. And there will be times where like we're going along and everything's fine, and then there could be one situation where something seems a little off, and then we'll just kind of want to stop filming, and be like, and not necessarily end the project, but just kind of be like, in that one instance, like,
Check in again.
this person doesn't feel comfortable in this instance. It's drawing a lot of attention. Maybe let's just cut filming for now and resume it another day because it's too much. So yeah.
Gotcha. I kind of want to come back to the consent forms, because I think that's really interesting, because I was just on a trip where I was filming, and I was filming in the home of a policeman, and the policeman didn't want to be on camera because he didn't want people to know where he was living or anything like that. And I was kind of like, well, the whole point of me being here is to get like an emotional story, and if you don't want to be on camera, I'm not gonna get that here. So it's like, I might as well just not film in this location, or with you. And so when in the process do you guys give those forms so that they can consent to what happens with their story? Do you do that up front? Do you do that in the back? Because like, is there a point where it's ever like, okay, well, if this person doesn't want to be, if this person only wants to be in one of the 5 or 6 channels, then is it worth us doing it, like talking with them or doing an interview or whatever it is, it's going to the next person who's maybe more okay with putting their story on more channels?
Yeah, good question. It depends on what kind of story we're getting. So if it's a video story, because we're spending a lot of money on that project, you do really need to have someone who's going to be comfortable with it. And we have had that happen before, where this is before I came into medical teams, or was like on the video trips, but they had someone where they got deep into filming that week. And then I think they finished it and they produced the video. And then she was like, I don't want it on social media. It was like an after the fact kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, and you have to honor it. Like that's the whole thing. And so, so that's kind of a rough situation. And to avoid that, I think it is really that kind of getting that informed consent ahead of time. So we try to get it before the trip by sending the comms officer in to really explain it to them, or someone that's like the medical professional, whoever they know that is representing the organization, send them in to really do that informed consent ask. And then we'll check in with them again when we get in country. So if we didn't get the form beforehand for some reason, but they have the informed consent ask, then we'll get the form like on day one when we meet them. I'm a big believer in getting consent before you do anything, because I think it's really important for people to understand what they're getting into and what they're agreeing to. Because if you can imagine being on their side of it and like having someone interviewing you and you have this question in the back of your mind the whole time of like, where is this going? What do they want from me? How are they going to use this? Like or maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm a little too skeptical.
Yeah, no, I get
yeah.
that. I kind of go back and forth because I've done film interviews with people where if I were to have given them a consent form or release form up front, they probably would have been scared off and not done it. But after doing the interview with them, then saying like, hey, can you just read over this and sign it so that I have permission to use what we just shot? And at that point, they already know what they told me. And then they're more comfortable being like, oh, well, I know I already didn't say anything that I don't care gets out. So then they're much more willing to sign it. So it's a balance, and I kind of go back and forth. I guess it's just one of those you have to play in the moment.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. I think we've gotten the media release form after the fact before too. But it's like, to me, I'm like, as long as the consent's there and they understand that before you get into it, like that's okay. But like yeah, we probably don't give as much thought as to like when we have them sign the form. We just kind of want to make sure more that they understand the context first, and then having them sign the form at some point. So we make sure that our butts are covered, honestly.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And then we also make sure that they understand that they have the right to revoke consent, which has happened even with former like staff members who have left the organization, or like patients. We just say like, hey, you can revoke this at any time,
Yeah.
So then they just know that they're in full control.
Yeah. Wow. That's powerful. I like that you guys like, honor and respect everybody in that way. I think that's super cool.
It's pretty important.
Yeah. All right. Going back to Florence's story. Did you send that team or get that content with an in-house team? Did you get external contractors, or who was going to do the work?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah. So we whenever we're doing a video trip, to me, the most important thing is making sure that we have the right people on the team. It can really throw off the dynamic if you have someone on the team who does not know what they're doing, or who is not really bringing that A game that you need in that zone. So what I look for a lot in a team is, A, are they competent at whatever their skill is? B, who's the best at doing that thing? Because really, I need like the best of the best doing it, like the cinematography or the photography or the direction or whatever that is. So like I need a team that I can trust that is really going to live into their role and that hit that sweet spot. And then I think the third thing is like, can they be calm, cool, and collected? Can they be like level-headed and flexible? Because like video shoots don't always go the way that you think they're going to go. And you have to, if you're set in your ways and you're expecting something to go exactly the way you want it to go, I'm like, you're going to be disappointed. But if you go in open-minded and flexible, then you can be delighted and surprised. Like, I think that's my favorite thing about it is I'm like, there's a certain amount of things that you can control going into the shoot. Like you can kind of try and set up the schedule. You can do all the pre-work. You can meet with a team and plan. You can prep the interviewee, but it's like things could still take a turn and you just never really know, and you have to flex. So yeah, that's kind of what I look for in a team. And so we work with external producers that we've worked with quite a few times. They're called Prospect Arts. They're based out of the UK. Beautiful cinematography. And then like great, the head of the company serves as our director. So they'll be actually directing interviews. I really like setting it up that way because then we'll have usually 2 staff members. It's usually been me serving as the team leader. So I'm like basically the EP, the executive producer. Like I'm making everything happen. I'm setting up the trip. I'm running the budget. I'm making sure everyone's getting from A to B. I'm doing all those pieces. And then I also, my strength in the team is the photography. So I'll just kind of do photography and work with the cinematographer to make sure we're capturing everything that I think needs to be captured visually. And then we'll usually bring in someone who's kind of like a brand or story director who can just sit and listen in on the interviews and be that kind of second person to be like, are we really capturing the brand sound bites that we need? Are we really getting the story narrative that we need out of this? Do we miss anything? So they can be that second ear for the director during that time, and help really focus on zooming out while we're on that trip to make sure we're checking all those boxes. So I find that works really well because everyone lives into their role really well. And then you get this like smooth flowing kind of camaraderie and the flow basically while you're on the trips. That I think that works really well. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that because that was one of my questions is when do you like outsource some of the work and find contractors versus do it yourself with your in-house team? But it seems like I love your answer of, whoever is best for the job, whoever is most equipped and is the powerhouse in that field, let's do that. So we make sure that we put our best foot forward. So
yeah. And it depends on the context too. Like it's like I just had a video request come up the other day for a $50,000 grant that we want to submit next week. So I was on the ground at a clinic filming yesterday, and like in that context, I'm the best person for it because I'm the only person who knows how to film on my team and like get that done. And I'm like, if someone,
yeah.
I feel like you get this, like as a creative, you have to keep your ego in check. And a lot of creatives don't, but like I try really hard to, because I'm like, if someone comes along and they're better at it than I am, I'm like, great, that's you go. Like I want the best. So like you're better at this, you go do it, and I'll take a step back and lean into whatever I'm good at, And so I think that's really what you need at the end of the day. You need someone who's going to be able to kind of drive forward that vision and be like, whoever is doing it, it doesn't necessarily matter. It's really like, can we accomplish something great together?
Yeah. I love that. Okay. So then talking about the editing, the post-production, I noticed that Florence's story was broken into 3 parts on YouTube. It's about 2 minutes each, a little over. And episodes 1, 2, 3, talk to me about that and how that decision got made as opposed to keeping it just one longer 6-7 minute piece. And did you find that was more effective than maybe keeping it a whole piece? Or I'm just so curious about the effects of that decision.
Yeah, it's funny because I used to work at PBS, and so in television, you can do episodics, and then in like YouTube, you can have this sort of like episodic storytelling format. And I saw another nonprofit that did it, and I thought, oh, that's really cool. That could be something fun that we could do. But it was something that I mentioned at one point, and then we went into Florence's trip, not really necessarily with doing like an episodic in mind, more with just getting her story. And then after the fact, we were talking through it, and we were kind of like, oh, you can kind of see this sort of 3-part narrative to her story that we could tell in 3 parts to maybe see if we can tell it better that way. Because a lot of times when you're doing like those sort of stories, unless there's a real clear chronology and even like logic to it, I think you get this in like the video production world, like it's tricky. You're trying to simplify the storyline as much as you possibly can, and then you're going into it with so much information and detail that really enriches the story, but maybe it doesn't deliver as well on video. And so you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I actually cut this to make it really emotional and impactful in the way that I need it to be communicated? And is it communicating, like, even if I like all these different pieces of the story, is it communicating the narrative that I need to communicate? And then sometimes you leave things on the editing room floor or the cutting room floor because you're like, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, did you kind of plan that in? Probably not, because you found the story on the field, so you wouldn't have known that it would have fit into 3 episodes pretty nicely before.
No, yeah, I mean, arguably, I think they decided to cut it into episodes, or like we kind of went that way with the first part of the story, almost as trying to do a teaser effect and see if it worked. Because in my mind, I actually think it worked better as 2 videos rather than 3. So the first video, though, would be 5 minutes long, and that's really the story of Florence nearly losing her son Terry to a really bad bout of malnutrition and malaria. And so that's kind of that classic like emergency medical story that we're trying to tell as an organization, is like, this is a really real situation that happens for the people that we serve. almost on a daily basis. And here's just one example of it, through this, like, told through the lens of this really powerhouse, like passionate, incredible mother who was desperately afraid of losing her child, like literally all thought that her child was already dead. And so that's like one part of the narrative. And then, and then in that story, like typically I feel like the nonprofit is the hero. And we were really trying to go into her story and be like, yeah, but Florence is a hero here. Like she is really a big part of the heroism of this story. She was the one who took her son to the clinic. She stayed by him throughout the night. She was determined to make sure it never happened again. And then she didn't stop there. She was like, that's the best part of the next part of the story. And I love that kind of part 3, where it's like, she decided this is never going to happen again for her family. And she also decided she didn't want it to happen for anyone in her community either. So she built this incredible garden. She learned from medical teams how to grow this food. She teaches other mothers on a weekly basis. And I was like, what an amazing person. Like, she's just incredible. And you feel that when you're with her too. You're just like, she's like funny and confident and beautiful and put together. And there were these 2 favorite moments that I had on that trip where one was, when you're there, and you get this because you're a visual person too. Like if you're a photographer or like cinematographer, you see the beauty in everything. And so she was living in like a mud hut in a refugee settlement with like this beautiful backyard with all of these like banana leaves, and it's just like lush and green. And even the mud colors are really beautiful and stunning. And you get that gorgeous light coming into the door where I can capture her inside. It's just stunning. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. Like her home is so beautiful. Florence, who is a secret genius that wouldn't tell us because she speaks French, Swahili, she understands like English pretty much. Like she's just like brilliant.
Yeah.
She goes up to the interpreter, our nutritionist, Ahab, at one point, and she goes, did they mean it? Did they really mean it when they said my home was beautiful? And he told us that later, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's so sweet. And what a like relatable moment that here she is, this like mother and this woman who really cares about hospitality and presenting well and making sure people feel at home. So sweet.
Oh, that's nice. So I love that you said that you like the first 2 months. You would have done 2 episodes, because I noticed that on your website you actually had episodes 1 and 2 put together. One of the busted. Sometimes Lauren's like, I'm just gonna do this my way.
Lauren is always like, I'm just gonna do this my way. But I mean, like, I can respect,
totally
the client and like what they need, because that's just a part of being creative, right?
I love it. So did you guys ever compare? This is what I'm so curious about A/B testing is like, did you ever compare the impact of 3 small episodes versus 1 longer video? Was that comparison ever done?
I wish. I mean, the only comparison you could really tell from it is the event. So I did stitch together basically a 7-minute video where it just flowed from one video into the next one, whatever. It's a fade to black and then fade in. So it's not that hard. And that I think did okay. I feel like her 5-minute video works really well in an event context. And then I think, in my opinion, I think it works well to almost like follow up with the 3rd video after the event or something like that. Like that's what I would have liked to have tried as like a, hey, here's what Florence is doing now. But the way we did it was we didn't really A/B test it. It was kind of a test in and of itself to try doing the episodics and see if it worked. And I think a couple of things about it. One, I think it would have been better to actually go into a shoot with that kind of production mentality. So I think if you're going to do episodes, I think you actually have to structure a shoot around it and build it out in order to have enough content to really make it work and tell that story well and with intentionality. So that's one thing I would do differently. And I think it was okay to like try something new that we were doing for the first time. Two, I think that the content strategy around it wasn't the most strategic at that time, because the approach was to just inundate. And so it was like a complete social media takeover. If you look back at medical teams for that period of time, you will see a solid grid and then some of just Florence and Thierry content. I don't think that works in the social landscape that we're in these days. I think people get disinterested really quickly. And
Mm.
so I think you have to like really have a little bit more variety to your content. And you can still use the same story again and again and again and again and again. But I think if they're hearing it every single day, you might want to take a different strategy there, right? It might be like more the story told in a social media, like kind of video from Florence firsthand, or something that's kind of like an Instagram takeover by her or something like that. But
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
yeah. And I also think that that was around the time that like reels are starting to take over more and photos weren't really being as performing as well. So I think that kind of added to it. And then the third thing is that I think that like, I don't think we had maybe like the narrative at the time was like, oh, video doesn't perform well over email. And so it just isn't performing well, isn't engaging well. And I don't think that that was necessarily true. There's this interesting thing that happens that I've noticed in nonprofits is like, if something doesn't perform well, they tend to blame the content. They tend to be like, oh, the story wasn't good enough. Or the like photos weren't like, you know, like, or whatever, like it like wasn't good enough. And I was like, I've always kind of taken the stance of like, that means we're not very good storytellers. Like that's kind of
Yeah.
my response is I'm like, that means we're probably not telling the story very well. And I think we actually saw that come to life this last video that we did in Colombia with Marguerite. Also kind of like a multi-part story. She's a community health worker. We did like a solid 5-minute story video with her, but then there are other aspects to her story and her interacting with people in the community, part of the team. And it performed great on email. Like it did really, really well. And I think it was the way we were telling the story, like in the copy around her video, that really made that difference. So
Yeah.
I do think that like the organization is still kind of figuring out that there's some things that we do really well with A/B testing, and there's some things where it's like there's not a lot of clarity into like why something performs well and why it doesn't. And then the risk that you have there as an organization is like leaning into blame culture, which I think is a huge inhibitor, because I think it's much better to actually lean into like learning culture. Okay, great, that didn't perform. What can we learn from this? Why didn't it perform? Let's ask questions. Let's lean into that. Let's explore this and do some more testing and kind of and figure it out, you know, rather than making assumptions that might not be true.
Yeah. I love that. That's a great take. Okay, cool. So I got a couple more questions. I think we could probably do them pretty quick, like
Sure.
rapid fire kind of style. Do you guys ever run any paid ads?
We do. Yes. Yeah.
And do people get mad at you for spending money on media or marketing?
Yeah, who doesn't? I mean, Charity Water has the perfect strategy, right? Have someone cover your overhead and then say 100% of your funds go straight to the cause. Like that's the donor dream. I don't know if they necessarily get mad at us. I haven't necessarily heard that from donors. I do think that it is a battle sometimes in the nonprofit world to get people to understand why communications are so important. Because a lot of times you have this age-old battle between the program team and the marketing team, where the program team is like, we're actually doing the work on the ground. Why like and even sometimes they're getting more funding through institutional funds, and they're like, what is the marketing team even doing? And which is an unhelpful narrative. It's a really difficult narrative to combat.
Yeah.
And I think what we're really doing is like when you have private fundraising, it gives you so much more leverage to actually get the work done even better. And institutional funding sometimes only goes so far. Like sometimes you still have like supply stockouts, and you need to have more staff and cover the cost of the staff salaries. And you need to cover the cost of the staff salaries at the country office level who are running like HR and logistics and like IT and all those different things that make the country run. So it's it's a challenge in the nonprofit setting.
Totally. It's definitely
But with ads, we do run them. Yeah.
How do you make sure the videos get seen, i.e. get more than like 13 views or like once you put all this time and money into the content, is it just inundated in all the different platforms, all the different channels, or?
Yeah. I don't know what this is like for you, like working at the ad agency, but you know, when you're like on a creative team, it's not just you making all the decision making. You're in this kind of decision making sphere with a bunch of people with a bunch of different opinions. Um, it's great if you can see something come together that's cohesive on the outside. So someone on the outside seeing medical teams and it's like, oh, this is all really cohesive and coherent. That's like the dream, because I'm like, oh, I'm sure that that did not happen without much kind of like debate or conversation or rethinking or trying to re-strategize behind the scenes. You know, that's really a reality of what we go through a lot of the time. So
Right.
with the oh wait, I forgot your question. I'm so
How do you
sorry.
make sure people get eyes on it? Like, how do you make sure when it gets made gets viewed?
A lot of it is doing kind of cross-channel content strategy. So just like syncing up with email, social media, blog, website, PR, getting all those people in the room and saying like, okay, how can we leverage this content? What do you think? Where can it work? Um, you know, how do we need to recut that for an event or for an ad, or what do we actually need to reach the audiences? In an ideal world, you're really looking at who you're targeting. You're doing actual segmentation based off of the audiences that you're trying to reach and their engagement, and you're shaping content around what you think is actually going to appeal to them the most. We're a bit scrappy, so I think we've gotten there in some ways, and in other ways, like we're not quite there yet. But that's that's marketing. That's like how you do it. And so I think that really we are shifting a little bit away from just kind of focusing on the story of one to actually looking at, hey, let's start with that end goal of like, who are we targeting? How do we want to target them? What is the creative approach to really do it? Which should have been the way it was all along. And it worked fine. Like you leveraging stories and like event context of major donors works great. But I think that that's really the approach that we take to get videos seen, is like thinking about like, where is this going to be most useful? How is it going to hit with this audience? Does it need to be in a different kind of form or a shorter form to really hit with them? While like, reels are really engaging right now. So then you have to, if you're taking a 16:9 and literally flipping it to a 9:16, that's a totally different format, but sometimes that works well. And so you have to really think through what those pieces are. And then personally, I really think copy around it is a big way to get people engaged. So how you leverage your copy in your email, how you hook people on social media. So having a really strong hook is a big deal of video. So and it's hard right now because like with the way that social media goes these days and like the kind of constantly rapidly evolving landscape, it is so hard to stay on top of trends and put something together that like would actually hook someone and appeal to them that quickly. And honestly, stories don't always work that well, because stories don't always start off with like a super strong dramatic hook. Like normally you kind of have like an ease into them. So you have this like, you're a bit at odds with the way that people are consuming content these days.
Yeah, my whole ad agency's take was changing out those hooks, like using the same video but swapping the first header, the first 10 seconds, and putting out the same video.
That's a good approach. Yeah.
Speaking of kind of catering to your audience and really marketing for specific demographics, are you guys trying to target the younger generations? And if so, how?
No. Historically we weren't, and I think we are starting to. So historically, our average donor, I think a few years ago, and this might still be the case, was like 75 years old. Not kidding, like our average donor. So they're not really like young at this point, and they're also not really on social media. And I and a bunch of other people in our department really saw, hey, this is an actual problem if like our donors are really in an older generation and we don't have any younger donors coming up to replace them. So I think the younger donors that we're targeting now really are like more in that kind of Gen X generation, so people with families, with children. And what we discovered too is that women actually really drive a lot of like the financial donation decision making in the household. So really we target women and mothers because they're the ones who are making those big decisions. And so that's I think a big part of it. But we're also we started actually did this segmentation recently with our new monthly marketing program, and have some plans around targeting the younger generation, the millennials.
Sure.
And really, I think anything to target them is just going to be, it's just kind of real video content on social. This is one of those things where I have a pretty different opinion from, I think, how we've been doing it or how the organization does things. So like,
So, what is that? What's the Lauren opinion versus maybe a broader?
Because I just have a podcast called The Lauren Opinion.
The Lauren Opinion, do it, please. I'd subscribe. No, but this is a topic that's close to my heart because I grew up around a lot of nonprofits, and I've seen the donor base grow in age, and I don't feel like younger generations really prioritize giving or supporting nonprofit causes as much. And so I'm always curious what nonprofits are doing in order to kind of try to bring in the younger generations, as the average age gets to be 75 and more, for not just yours, it sounds like, but for a lot of them. I feel like that's the case. So I'm always kind of curious what our best practices, and how do you start leaning into those generations?
Such a good question. It's I'm glad that that's what you're passionate about. That's very exciting.
Well, that's my job as a marketer in the nonprofit space. So I'm really just trying to get advice here.
Well, way to take it seriously. That's good. I don't know if this is right or not. This is maybe like my own gut check coming into it. So like, because I studied business and marketing in school, and there's a piece behind it where you really have to leverage empathy and leverage that around like a generation and kind of figure out what does empathy look like for these people. Because I really think that's like a lot of what goes behind good advertising and marketing is you're getting at their motivation, right? Their drive, like something that's gonna be compelling to them or really resonate for them or align with their values. And so in an ideal world, we would be having more of those conversations and driving our content from that starting point as saying like, okay, I'm a 26-year-old millennial. I'm not, but like,
Is that a good?
We'll pretend. And so what really matters to the generation, what really stands out to them, what is the kind of how do they engage with content? Where are they engaging with content? And then like what when you look at how they engage with social causes, what do they do around that? Is it something where they want to speak their own voice into it? Is it something where they care about like a celebrity that they see like really advocating for something? Is it something where they themselves want to just reshare a post and be the advocate? And so then that can shape how you build that content. So if you're building more, if they're more like advocates, right, and they're kind of more passionate about speaking out about causes or being engaged in that way or being asked to contribute their opinion or their voice to something, kind of like the influencer model, then it's like, okay, how do you build something around that content-wise where you can really leverage sort of influencers or put out posts that actually are making some kind of value statement that they would then reshare because they're like, oh, this is something about who I am. This is something that resonates with me. This is how I connect to this cause. And so I think that's kind of my gut intuition around it. And that's what I've like vocalized with, even my colleagues being like, hey, I think this generation operates differently. And we've really been leveraging pathos with the older generations because that worked. That was like the 90s Sarah McLachlan commercials that we all saw, it's like, and even celebrity, I think that kind of works more with maybe arguably some millennials going up into like the boomers, but I'm like, does that work with millennials? We don't really know. So I think shifting your approach, shifting your strategy, and leveraging empathy to really understand, I would say empathy and like market research, right? There's a lot of research available to understand what generations resonate with. And being willing to shift. I feel like people get so stuck sometimes in this nonprofit mentality of like, but this has always worked, so we're just going to keep doing it because it's always worked. And it's like, but the same thing that worked 10 years ago isn't going to work anymore now in this like rapidly evolving technological context that we live in. It's just, we have to be willing to shift and pivot, just like being on a video trip, be willing to kind of shift and pivot with what comes your way. And I think that organizations would be wise to leverage that with their marketing, creative, and fundraising strategies.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, I know I'm running short on time, but I wanted to see if you had any other just general advice for people doing media in the nonprofit space, anything we might not have touched on, but that you wanted to give your tip or advice or anything on.
Oh my gosh.
It's okay if not. I just wanted to.
No, I have so many things. I'm like, there's like, let's do Lauren's corner.
Lauren's
everyone
what
cares
was the
about
podcast?
Lauren's hot takes.
Lauren's hot takes. No, the Lauren Opinion Show or something.
Oh, the Lauren Opinion Show. Yeah, everyone cares so much about what I have to say. So important. So I think a couple of different things. One, I'm really passionate about fostering a healthy culture in a work environment, because I think it's really difficult to do content, creative, and marketing well if you don't have the right kind of cultural framework and environment to support that. The wrong environment kills creativity. It really just shoots it down immediately. And so that's something that I've been really passionate about protecting on my global team, especially because I'm working with people that come from different countries, backgrounds, cultures, languages. And so I had to, when you're leading in a nonprofit sphere, I think it sounds trite or kind of maybe repetitive, but I really want this to hit home, in that I do think actually being a servant leader and doing human-centered design is a wise approach. And it really combats that kind of that colonial narrative. So the approach I took with my team and building this global content team, I said, hey, what do you guys want to do? What do you want this to be? What do you need? How do you want this to look? What do you need from me? How can I serve you? And that has always been such an important part of my team, and why I think it thrives, and why I think it does really well, and why I think people are really happy to be on this team, because they're heard, because they are getting to do the things that they're asking for, and they're growing in that way. And it is also benefiting the business, because we're serving them and meeting them in that space, And I think before I came in, it was really just this take mentality of oh, let's just see what we can drain from you, and then never really giving anything in return. And I don't think people were doing that intentionally. I just don't think they were really aware that that was kind of the cycle. And I was like, we're gonna push right against that cycle and change it. I think that's one thing. I think another thing is the flexibility. Be flexible. Be willing to flex. And I think to create that really healthy culture where creativity can thrive, innovation can thrive, and you can then survive in this world that is constantly evolving, you have to create a space where it's okay to fail, and it's okay to have bad ideas, and and there's no blame or shame in it. There is a willingness to lean into when things don't go well, and learn from it, and be like, hey, let's take a look at this together. So don't focus on the person, focus on the events, and just say hey, this thing happened. Let's explore why that happened, or what's going well, what's not going well. And that kind of continuous learning, that Kaizen approach of let's just always be willing to flex and grow and change and learn and evolve. Because if you don't, then you're going to find yourself stuck in the past very quickly. And also you're going to find yourself with employees who don't speak up because they don't feel like it's safe to. They don't feel like it's they're going to be heard or valued, or really be able to kind of carry forth the vision and the ideas and the special thing that they're bringing to the table. So I get pretty passionate about that, because
I love that. I think that's so important, because you see the trickle effects of that. Because if the media and marketing team that's representing your organization is just putting out content under a stressed environment because they feel they need to, that can come through, as opposed to people who want to share the story with you because they're excited, because they're having fun doing the work, supporting the work, So it kind of where's the start of that, and make sure that that's healthy, so that then all the overflow from that space, all the creative output is, also from that good, healthy space. I love that. I think that's that's an amazing piece of advice.
Which reminds me of one more thing, if I can do it.
Please. Oh, please. Yeah.
I also get really, because I'm so passionate about culture and creating a healthy environment for people to thrive creatively. I think the bringing it up to the executive level, having a CEO or an executive team who is driving forward communication about the organizational impact, about stories. I'm such a big believer in internal marketing, and I don't think nonprofits really see that or do that enough. I've seen some do it really well. Like IJM, I used to work there for a little bit, and they did such a good job with weekly. Actually, I have a friend I can connect you to there too. But he's been the writer there for 10 years. But weekly, they are communicating like what the impact is that they're having around the world and what the need is that they're seeing. And they're doing it actually through a weekly prayer meeting where the CEO is standing up there with a marker and a board and saying like, okay, like from the programs team, speak up, tell me what's going on. What are your prayer requests and what are the celebrations? What are things that we're celebrating? And what it did is it pulled everyone into the same room, literally, and said, you guys are all a part of this mission. Every single one of you, you're here for a reason. And this is what we're accomplishing together. You might not feel that way if you're in IT or if you're in HR or if you're over here doing like sitting at a desk, but you are. This work is being made possible because of you. And so I think nonprofits miss that. They miss that it's like, you have this group of people who are aligned the same way your donors are. And I believe this so much about staff. This is actually why we started telling staff stories a couple of years ago, because I was told at first, like, oh, we don't do staff video stories. They don't work. They're not good for fundraising. And I was like,
that was actually one of my questions I was going to ask about is like, I know you're doing a series about some of your staff workers. And I was like, I was going to ask about that, but we ran out of time. But I'm glad you mentioned that.
I get so lit up about it, Nathan, because I am just like, and again, Lauren's opinion, but I'm like, I disagree. I was like, I think the same driving force that is making that doctor show up early in the morning and stay through the night, making sure that people are surviving, is the exact same, not just surviving, but thriving. That is the exact same force that drives the donors, that drives your staff sitting at desks, that drives everyone. That is the uniting force of the team, right? Is that like we're all in this for the same reason. And so, it was funny because we did air one of our staff videos, and it garnered a spontaneous donation of $1,000 from a donor who had only given like 25 before or something like that. And wow. I was just like, I love being right about these things.
That's great. Oh, I love that.
I don't rub it in people's faces, but like internally, I'm like, I knew it would work, and I'm so excited.
I love that.
Yeah. So I really think that like executives and leaders would do well to just not to manipulate people, like not to be like, oh, this is why we're not paying you more or whatever, but it is to ignite that fire and say, like, remind people, hey, there's a reason why we do this work, and this is why.
Wow, amazing, awesome. Well, thank you, Lauren, so much. I don't know, do you want to give a place where people can find you or the organization, media channels?
Absolutely. Thanks, Nathan. Yeah, you can find us at medicalteams.org. Please go check out our blog posts. You can follow us at Medical Teams on Instagram. I think we're getting a TikTok soon. We might not be. I don't think we're on TikTok quite yet, but Facebook. And yeah, sign up for emails. You'll get all these great impact reports and newsletters and keep up to date on some of these great stories that we're talking about that we're sharing throughout the year.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lauren. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Nathan. Good to see you. Thanks for having me. This has been fun.
You too. Yeah, so fun. Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe to our channels for future content. It really helps us out. This podcast is brought to you by Travelite Studios. Travelite is a full-service film production company that specializes in documentary and promotional videos for your nonprofit. We are a multicultural team of award-winning creatives with a passion to help organizations grow their reach. We can be your media team or work alongside your media team to deliver captivating content that energizes your audience. Travelite takes the time to truly get to know you and your needs and includes extra tools to help make your videos be the most powerful they can be. Go to travelitestudios.com right now to plan a project and have your story and solutions presented to viewers in a beautifully compelling way. That's travelitestudios.com.